A billionaire thought his power made him untouchable, humiliating a poor waiter and kicking a terrified puppy for all to see. But he was wrong. A Navy SEAL, forged by war and bound by honor, was watching, and that moment would change everything. This is a story of courage, loyalty, and redemption. If it touches your heart, hit subscribe for more stories of second chances and the power of kindness. The evening sun melted slowly into the Pacific, staining the sky above San Diego in soft amber and coral. Through the high windows of Le Méridien, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, that golden light slid across polished floors and crystal glasses, gilding everything in an air of fragile perfection. It was the kind of night where wealth disguised itself as virtue and conversation sparkled louder than truth. Ethan Cole stood at the far end of the hall, near a window overlooking the marina. He looked like a man carved from discipline itself. Broad shoulders framed by a dark tailored shirt, sleeves rolled once at the forearms, to reveal skin tanned by years of sun and salt water. His jaw was strong, touched by a day's worth of stubble. His hair, short and chestnut brown, carried the stubborn wave of someone who rarely looked in a mirror. His eyes, an unsettled gray-blue, seemed to take in everything and judge nothing. He had the kind of stillness that made people instinctively move out of his way without knowing why. Beside him lay Ranger, his retired K-9 partner, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a coat of ash and bronze, muscles still taut from years of service. Ranger's ears twitched at every sound, a champagne cork, the clink of silver, laughter dripping with insincerity. He was not comfortable here, neither was Ethan. Both of them preferred silence to chatter, duty to display. The fundraiser was hosted by Richard Grant, a real estate magnate known for his empire of glass towers and his ruthless approach to everything else. Grant was in his late 40s, tall but soft around the middle, with slicked back blonde hair that gleamed too perfectly under the chandeliers. His smile was rehearsed, his handshake practiced, a man whose success depended on making others feel smaller. At his side stood Beverly Grant, his wife, a woman in her early 40s whose elegance was as sharp as her tongue. She wore a silver gown that shimmered like armor, and diamonds that caught the light each time she gestured dramatically. Her beauty was real but brittle, like glass stretched too thin. They moved through the room surrounded by laughter and praise, their names whispered like a brand. Everyone wanted a favor. Everyone owed them something. Everyone except Ethan. He had been invited by an old commander to represent the Veterans Rescue Program, an initiative that trained retired military dogs to become therapy animals. For him, it was a duty, not a privilege. For the Grants, it was another chance to be photographed doing good. Across the room, Jake Miller adjusted a tray of wine glasses, sweat beating at the nape of his neck. The 22-year-old waiter was lean, almost fragile-looking, with sandy hair that refused to stay combed, and soft brown eyes that carried both kindness and exhaustion. His uniform, though neatly pressed, hung slightly loose on his frame, a borrowed shell of professionalism that couldn't hide the faint tremor in his hands. Jake worked double shifts at the restaurant to pay for community college classes in photography. He was bright, patient, and too gentle for a world that often demanded hardness. His only friend here was a secret, a 4-month-old German shepherd puppy named Buddy, rescued from a roadside box 2 weeks earlier. Buddy was all paws, floppy ears, and oversized curiosity, hidden in a crate behind the kitchen freezer during Jake's shifts. The little dog gave Jake something to come home to, something that didn't judge his cheap clothes or empty pockets. The orchestra began a waltz. The chandeliers trembled with light. Waiters moved like clockwork between tables, and Jake, balancing a tray of Pinot Noir, took a deep breath. He'd done this 100 times, but tonight felt heavier. Maybe it was the eyes of the rich watching him like a test he wasn't meant to pass. Beverly Grant's laughter sliced through the room. "Richard," she purred, "do you see how adorable these charity types are? They think one dinner will save the world." Jake didn't look up, only stepped closer to refill her glass. But as she turned, her jeweled bracelet caught the rim of his tray. The motion was small, almost invisible, yet enough. A glass of red wine tipped, somersaulted through the air, and splashed across the shimmering fabric of her gown. The music stopped mid-note. The hall froze. For one eternal second, Jake's breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," he stammered, reaching for napkins. Beverly's face shifted from disbelief to fury, her cheeks blotching crimson beneath flawless makeup. "Do you have any idea what this costs?" she hissed, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You clumsy little idiot!" Jake dropped to his knees, dabbing at the fabric, voice cracking. "Please, it was an accident. I'll—" "Get away from me!" she shrieked, shoving his arm. The guests whispered, half shocked, half thrilled by the spectacle. At that exact moment, a sound broke the tension, a high-pitched bark echoing from the kitchen. Buddy had heard the shout and wriggled through the back door, his small frame darting between polished shoes and startled feet. His tail was tucked, ears flat, but his loyalty overpowered his fear. He ran straight toward Jake, barking frantically. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "What on earth?" Beverly recoiled, clutching her ruined dress. Richard Grant's expression twisted in disgust. "Is this your dog?" he barked, stepping forward. "You bring a filthy mutt into my event?" Jake reached for Buddy, panic flooding his chest. "Please, sir, he's harmless." Grant's polished loafer lashed out, striking the puppy's side and sending Buddy tumbling into a table leg with a yelp that tore through the room. The sound was small, but it broke something inside Ethan. Ranger lifted his head instantly, ears erect. Ethan's hand, resting on his leash, clenched. The conversations around him blurred into white noise. All he saw was a man using power to hurt something defenseless. Grant raised his leg again. "Get this animal out of here before I—" "Don't," a calm voice interrupted. The word was quiet, but it carried like a command. Ethan stepped forward through the circle of shocked guests, each slow stride deliberate. His posture was relaxed, yet unyielding, like a storm walking on two legs. Ranger padded silently beside him, hackles half raised but gaze steady. Grant blinked, thrown off by the interruption. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan stopped an arm's length away. "Someone who's seen what real courage looks like," he said evenly. "And it doesn't look like a man kicking a puppy to feel tall." Grant's face darkened. "This is my event. You don't get to lecture me in my own house." "Then maybe you should learn how to be a better host." Before Grant could react, Ethan crouched, lifted Buddy gently, and checked for injury. The puppy trembled, but wagged his tail weakly, as if recognizing safety. Ethan's calloused hand brushed through the soft fur, inspecting ribs with the same precision he once used to find shrapnel wounds on the field. "You hurt him," he said quietly, not accusing, not pleading, simply stating fact. "Get your hands off my property," Grant snapped. Ethan rose to his full height. The room seemed smaller around him. That dog isn't your property, neither is decency, though you've been trying to buy that too. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Richard Grant opened his mouth, but no sound came. Around them, people shifted uncomfortably, some ashamed, some secretly satisfied. Beverly's hand trembled against her jeweled clutch. Ethan set Buddy into Jake's arms. "Take him outside," he said softly. Jake nodded, tears brimming, clutching the puppy like a lifeline. When the door closed behind them, Ethan turned back to Grant. His voice stayed calm, but the steel in it could cut glass. "You can buy anything in this room," he said, "except a soul." Grant tried to laugh it off, but it came out brittle. "You think you're some kind of hero?" "No," Ethan replied, picking up Ranger's leash. "Heroes don't exist, just people who stop cowards when no one else will." He turned to leave, Ranger trotting silently at his side, leaving behind a silence more devastating than any punch. The orchestra didn't resume. Champagne glasses stayed untouched, and for the first time in years, Richard Grant had nothing to say. Outside, under the ocean breeze, Jake sat on the curb, cradling Buddy. The little dog whimpered softly, pressing his nose into Jake's chest. Ethan approached, his boots scuffing the pavement. He crouched beside them, examining Buddy again under the streetlight. "He's bruised, but he'll live," Ethan murmured. "He's tougher than he looks." Jake looked up, his eyes wet. "Why did you do that? You don't even know us." Ethan's gaze softened. "You didn't need to know someone to know what's right," he said simply. Then he glanced at Ranger, whose tail flicked once in silent approval. "You got a place to stay tonight, kid?" Jake shook his head. "I'll figure it out." "Figuring it out is overrated," Ethan replied, standing. "Come on. I've got room, the dog too." As they walked away, the city lights shimmered on the wet asphalt like broken glass. Behind them, the world of Crystal and Cruelty kept spinning, unaware that a quiet alliance had just begun. One forged not by blood or wealth, but by the simple act of standing between pain and mercy. The night air over San Diego was heavy with salt and fog. The city lights, distant and restless, blinked like 1,000 secrets trying to stay hidden. Ethan Cole gripped the worn steering wheel of his old Ford F-250 as it rumbled down the narrow coastal road, its headlights cutting through mist that curled like ghosts around the cliffs. Beside him, Jake Miller sat silent, one arm wrapped protectively around the trembling puppy, Buddy. The little dog's chest rose and fell rapidly beneath the blanket, his soft fur sticky with dried wine and dirt. Ranger lay in the back seat, his head resting on his paws, amber eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. Every few seconds, his ears flicked back, listening, gauging distance, measuring threat. Ethan trusted that instinct more than any radar. "Are they still following?" Jake asked quietly. His voice carried the thin, brittle edge of someone who had run out of adrenaline, but not of fear. Ethan checked the mirror again. 2 pairs of headlights followed at a measured distance. Black SUVs. Too clean, too synchronized to be coincidence. "Yeah," he said. "Grant doesn't like loose ends." Jake looked down at Buddy, brushing his fingers over the puppy's ear. "He said he'd sue me, but this?" Ethan's tone stayed calm, steady, as if carved from the same rock as the cliffs they passed. "Men like him don't sue, they erase. It's cleaner." The truck hit a patch of gravel, sliding slightly before Ethan corrected the wheel. The tires spat dust and salt. Ranger stood now, bracing himself, a low growl vibrating through the cabin. Ethan glanced in the rear view. The SUVs were gaining. "Hang on," he downshifted, turning sharply onto a dirt road that veered toward the cliffs. The truck jolted violently, the suspension groaning, but Ethan's grip didn't falter. The man drove like he breathed, precise, unflinching, reading terrain as if it spoke to him. Jake clung to the seat, his pulse thundering. "Do you even know where this goes?" Ethan's mouth twitched. "I built half the training routes out here back in '08. I know every turn, every dead end, and every exit." The first SUV appeared in the mirror, fishtailing on the dirt, headlights bouncing wildly. Ethan flicked off his own lights, plunging them into near darkness. Only the ghostly glow of the ocean below and the silver glint of moonlight guided them. Ranger barked once, a sharp warning. Ethan yanked the handbrake, spun the truck into a sudden left turn, and killed the engine. The vehicle skidded to a stop behind a cluster of wind-twisted cypress trees. The second SUV roared past on the main road, tires screaming. The other followed, chasing the phantom trail. For a moment, only the surf and the whisper of the wind remained. Jake exhaled shakily. "How did you—" "Habit," Ethan interrupted, voice low. "You learn how to disappear when the wrong people start watching." He stepped out of the truck, the crunch of gravel under his boots startling in the quiet, the scent of salt water mixed with pine. He scanned the horizon. The SUVs were gone for now. Ranger jumped down beside him, nose lifted, reading the wind like scripture. When Ethan finally turned back toward the truck, the mask of stoicism cracked slightly. His gaze lingered on Jake, the kid's clothes rumpled. His eyes raw and uncertain, but still holding some flicker of trust. It reminded Ethan of a time long ago, of younger men who'd followed him into places they weren't meant to survive. "Come on," he said. "We'll head to my place. You can't go back to the city tonight." They drove the remaining miles in silence. The road narrowed until it became more memory than asphalt, winding between dunes and tall seagrass. When they reached the old coastal bluff, the sound of the waves returned, steady, grounding. The cabin appeared through the fog. Small, weathered wood and salt-stained windows, with a porch that looked out over the endless Pacific. It wasn't much, but it stood firm against wind and time like its owner. Jake followed Ethan up the steps. Buddy clutched to his chest. "You live here alone?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, unlocking the door. "Me and Ranger. It's quiet. That's the point." The inside smelled faintly of coffee, gun oil, and cedar. A few framed photographs hung on the walls. Faded shots of men in uniform beside working dogs. Sandstorms in the background, desert eyes staring into the lens. Ethan dropped his keys on a table, knelt beside Ranger, and unhooked his leash. Jake stood awkwardly by the door, not sure whether to sit or apologize again. His eyes moved across the small room, a single bed, a wood stove, a map of the coastline pinned with red tacks. This wasn't a home built for comfort, it was built for survival. "Put him on the couch," Ethan said, nodding toward Buddy. "I'll get a towel." Jake obeyed, setting the puppy down gently. Buddy whimpered, but soon pressed himself into the blanket, exhausted. Ranger approached, sniffed him carefully, then lay down beside the smaller dog, tail thumping once in approval. "You sure he'll be okay?" Jake asked. "He's bruised, not broken," Ethan said from the kitchen, running water in a metal bowl. "Pain fades. It's fear that lingers." Jake looked at him curiously. "You talk like someone who's lost more than a job." Ethan paused. The overhead light carved his face into sharp planes, shadows deepening the scars near his jawline. Faint, almost hidden, but old enough to have stories. Let's just say I've seen what happens when people stop fighting back. He handed Jake the water bowl. Here, for him. They sat in near silence after that, the only sounds being the crackle of the wood stove and the rhythmic crash of waves outside. The boy drank in the warmth, his shoulders slowly unknotting. For the first time that night, Jake allowed himself to breathe fully. "Why'd you help me?" he asked finally. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Because I've been where you are. Different uniform, same feeling. Everyone watching you fall, no one lifting a hand." Jake nodded, eyes lowered. "I didn't even do anything wrong." "Doesn't matter," Ethan said. "Right and wrong don't weigh the same when money's holding the scale." Later, when Jake drifted to sleep on the couch, Buddy curled beneath Ranger's chest, Ethan stepped outside. The moon hung low over the water, silver light painting the horizon in shifting shades of steel. The wind tugged at his shirt, carrying the scent of salt and memory. He stared at the waves until they blurred. He remembered another night, a convoy gone wrong. A young handler named Mason who'd panicked, the explosion that followed, the sand, the fire, Ranger dragging him from the wreckage with a shredded vest. Mason didn't make it. That was the day Ethan learned silence could weigh more than sound. He rubbed a scar along his wrist, then looked back through the window. Jake was sleeping, his head tilted toward the dogs. There was something fragile about that scene. 3 survivors sharing warmth without words. Ranger padded to the door and sat beside him, watching the same horizon. Ethan crouched, scratching behind the shepherd's ear. "We can't keep running forever, buddy," he murmured. Ranger gave a soft whine. Not agreement, not refusal, just understanding. In the distance, faint headlights flickered again along the cliffs, too far to reach them yet. The war had followed them home. It always did, one way or another. Ethan exhaled, cold air fogging before him. "We'll deal with it in the morning," he said, mostly to himself. Then he went inside, locked the door, and sat down beside the stove. For the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. The storm came without warning, swallowing the coast in gray. Rain hammered the windshield of Ethan's truck as it wound along a narrow forest road, wipers struggling to keep up. The headlights cut through sheets of water, illuminating trees that bowed under the wind's weight. Jake held Buddy in his lap, his arms tight around the trembling puppy. The small German shepherd whimpered softly, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Beneath the blanket, the little dog's ribs rose unevenly, the sign Ethan had feared most. Ranger sat alert beside the boy, ears pricked, eyes darting between Ethan and Buddy. Every so often, the older dog leaned forward to lick the puppy's ear, a quiet reassurance that said, "You're not alone." "We're almost there," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. He knew these back roads like the lines of his own palm. He'd trained on them, run drills through them, disappeared into their shadows years ago when silence was survival. Jake's knuckles were white. "Who is this doctor again?" "Dr. Harris," Ethan replied. "Used to be a combat vet. Fixed men and dogs on the same tables. Saved more lives than anyone I ever met." The rain thickened. Up ahead, a dim light flickered through the storm. An old wooden house with a tin roof crouched between pines like it was hiding from the world. A hand-painted sign, half swallowed by ivy, read, "Harris Veterinary and Supply." Ethan parked close to the porch and jumped out, boots splashing in puddles. "Stay with Ranger," he ordered, then pounded on the door. Within seconds, light flooded the narrow windows, and the door creaked open. Dr. Harris stood framed by the glow of an oil lamp. He was in his late 50s, tall but slightly stooped, with iron-gray hair cut short and a beard that carried streaks of white like frost over charcoal. His eyes were sharp steel blue beneath heavy brows, the kind that saw through pain rather than around it. His left hand, missing 2 fingers from an old field injury, gripped the doorframe with practiced strength. When he saw Ethan, his expression softened, a ghost of a smile cutting through the years. "Cole," he said, voice gravelly from cigarettes and war. "Didn't think I'd see you outside a funeral." Ethan half smiled. "Not tonight, Doc. We've got a patient." Harris stepped aside. "Bring him in." Jake hurried forward with Buddy cradled in his arms. The warmth inside was instant. Wood stove crackling. Walls lined with medical charts, a faint smell of antiseptic and wet fur. A golden retriever with cloudy eyes lifted its head from a corner rug, tail thumping weakly in greeting. "Name's Daisy," Harris muttered. "She's the real boss here." Jake managed a nervous smile before laying Buddy onto the examination table. Harris pulled on gloves, movements efficient, no wasted motion. "What happened?" "Man kicked him hard," Ethan said flatly. "Rich bastard with no conscience." Harris grunted. "Most injuries I see started with a man like that." He examined Buddy with careful hands, murmuring under his breath. After a long moment, he looked up. 2 cracked ribs, light internal bruising, maybe a mild concussion. Lucky pup. Jake's eyes glistened. "He's going to live?" "With rest and care, yeah," Harris replied. He turned to a shelf, pulling down bandages, a vial, and a syringe. "You're his handler now. That means you don't panic when he hurts. He needs your calm more than your tears." Ethan watched silently, a faint flicker of nostalgia passing through him. Harris had spoken those same words to him in a battlefield tent years ago, except back then it was about a bleeding Marine, not a dog. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm as Harris injected a painkiller and began wrapping the small torso in gauze. Buddy whimpered once, then settled, eyes fluttering closed. "Keep him warm tonight," Harris said. "And no stairs, no rough play for 2 weeks. You got a quiet place?" Ethan nodded. "The cabin." Harris looked at him over his glasses. "You still hiding out there?" "Not hiding," Ethan said. "Just done talking to the world." The older man sighed, then clapped him on the shoulder. "You always were better with dogs than people." They left just before midnight. The rain had eased, the forest steaming in its aftermath. Jake sat in the back seat, Buddy asleep across his lap, Ranger curled protectively against him. The truck smelled of wet earth and relief. When they reached the cabin, the sky was clearing. A thin moon peeked through, silvering the waves. Inside, Ethan lit the stove again, the soft orange light pushing back the dark. Jake laid Buddy down on a blanket near the fire, then sat beside him. "He looks peaceful now," he whispered. "He's tougher than he looks," Ethan said. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Jake. "You did good tonight." Jake took it, both hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. "I thought he was going to die," he admitted, voice barely audible. "When I saw him on that table, I couldn't breathe." Ethan leaned back, staring into the flames. "That feeling doesn't go away," he said. "Not when you care, but you learn to carry it." Jake hesitated, then asked, "Did you ever lose one? Out there?" Ethan's eyes hardened slightly, the way waves freeze before breaking. Yeah, a handler named Mason. Young, brave. Thought courage could stop a bullet. It couldn't. Ranger dragged him out of the blast, but he trailed off, jaw tight. That was the last time I saluted anyone. The silence that followed was heavy, but not awkward. It was the kind of silence that honors what words can't repair. Ranger stirred, padding over to rest his head on Ethan's knee. Buddy shifted in his sleep, pressing against Jake's hand. The two pairs mirrored each other, men and dogs, scarred and still trying to heal. Jake broke the quiet. You talk like you've stopped believing in people. Ethan considered that. Not people, just the ones who think decency is optional. He looked at Jake, the boy's face lit by firelight, soft, young, still capable of wonder despite everything. Don't lose that, he said. The world will try to take it, but don't let it. Jake nodded slowly. I won't. Hours passed. The storm faded completely, replaced by the hush of the ocean outside. Jake fell asleep in the armchair, Buddy breathing softly beside him. Ethan sat awake, watching the flames, listening to the rhythm of Ranger's steady breathing. He thought about the kids' trust, the dog's resilience, and the way fate had thrown them together. He didn't believe in miracles, but maybe, just maybe, this was something close. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, the cabin was bathed in pale gold. The waves shimmered. The world, battered by rain, looked new again. Ethan stood by the window, arms folded. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a ghost haunting his own life. Behind him, Jake stirred, rubbing his eyes, and smiled faintly at the sight of Buddy still breathing. Morning, the boy said, voice rough with sleep. Morning, Ethan replied. He's going to make it. Jake exhaled in relief. Thank you for everything. Ethan nodded. Don't thank me. Just make sure he gets better. That's all the thanks I need. Outside, the sea kept moving. Endless, patient, unchanged. Inside the cabin, a new kind of silence settled. Not the heavy quiet of solitude, but the gentle stillness of shared healing. And as sunlight touched their faces, Ethan finally allowed himself to believe that some scars, even the invisible ones, could fade if you let someone close enough to see them. The morning broke cold and clear, the kind of sharp light that made the world look cleaner than it was. Ethan Cole stood by the porch railing, the Pacific stretching endless before him. The sea was calm, but something in the air felt wrong. Too still, too quiet, like a battlefield before the first shot. Behind him, through the cabin's open door, Jake Miller was feeding Buddy from a shallow bowl. The puppy had healed remarkably fast. His ribs no longer showed, and his tail thumped happily against the floor each time Ranger passed by. The two dogs had become inseparable, a young echo and an old shadow, always moving as one. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee. His jaw was rough with stubble, his eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. He had seen this pattern before. Men like Richard Grant never accepted humiliation. They waited, planned, and struck back with the precision money could buy. The first sign came an hour later. A black sedan rolled up the dirt road, tires crackling against gravel. Ethan tensed instinctively, his hand drifting toward the small holster he kept inside his jacket. From the car stepped a man in a tailored charcoal suit and polished shoes, unsuited for dirt roads. His posture was military straight, his hair black and neatly parted, a silver wristwatch glinting beneath the cuff. His face carried the smooth, indifferent confidence of someone used to winning. "Mr. Cole?" he asked, voice crisp. Ethan didn't answer. He simply waited. The man smiled faintly, unbothered. "Marcus Sterling, attorney for Richard Grant. I believe you have something that belongs to my client." Jake appeared at the doorway, Buddy at his feet. His expression flickered with unease. "What's he talking about?" Sterling's gaze moved to him, calculating. A ring, $50,000, platinum band with a sapphire stone, stolen from Mrs. Grant the night of the incident. He paused. And a German Shepherd puppy, also Mr. Grant's property. Jake's mouth fell open. "That's a lie. That dog was mine." Ethan raised a hand slightly, silencing him. "You've made your statement," he said to Sterling. "Now you can leave." Sterling's smile didn't waver. "I admire your composure, Mr. Cole, but I assure you this isn't a request. I've already spoken to the local sheriff's department. Officers will arrive soon with a warrant. My client's patience is limited." Ethan studied him, the steady hands, the calm eyes. A man who believed law was just another tool of leverage. "Tell Grant," he said evenly, "if he sends anyone here, he'd better bring more than paper." For the first time, Sterling's smile faltered. He straightened his tie, nodded curtly, and returned to his car. Dust rose behind the sedan as it vanished down the road. Jake exhaled shakily. "They can't really—" "They can," Ethan interrupted. "He's got money, connections, and a lawyer who plays dirtier than most politicians. We'll need proof, something that makes his lies collapse on their own." Later that afternoon, Ethan made a call. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Pierce," it said. "Logan, it's Cole." A pause, then a laugh. "Well, hell. Thought you were a ghost. What brings you back from the dead?" "Grant," Ethan said simply. "I need a favor." 2 hours later, Ethan and Jake drove north along the coast toward a run-down neighborhood where the city's new glass skyline gave way to old brick warehouses. They parked behind a half-collapsed sign that once read, "Pierce Security Solutions." The door opened before Ethan could knock. Logan Pierce was a mountain of a man, early 40s, 6'3", broad shoulders, arms tattooed with faded Marine insignia. His hair was cut short, streaked with gray, and his beard was rough but well kept. His left eye carried a faint scar through the brow, a gift from a roadside bomb in Kandahar. Despite the bulk, he moved with the quiet precision of a soldier who hadn't forgotten the weight of silence. He grinned, pulling Ethan into a rough handshake. "Still carrying the world, huh?" "Someone has to," Ethan replied. Logan's eyes flicked toward Jake, who lingered uncertainly at the doorway. "Kid?" "Jake Miller," Ethan said. "Grant's latest casualty." Logan's grin faded. "Yeah, I remember that bastard. Used to run private gigs for him. Cameras, bodyguards, all for show. Man treats staff like property." He walked to an old filing cabinet and rummaged through a drawer. "I still got the backup drives from his estate security. He paid me to wipe the originals before a software upgrade. Lucky for us, I don't delete things I might need later." He set down a dusty external drive. "Everything from that night's fundraiser. Video, audio, timestamps." Jake blinked. "You kept it?" Logan shrugged. "Insurance. Grant's the kind who stabs with a smile. Figured one day someone might need proof of it." Back at the cabin, Ethan connected the drive to his laptop. The footage appeared grainy but clear. Time-stamped security angles from the restaurant's grand hall. They watched as Jake tripped, the wine spilled, Beverly's fury, the small blur of Buddy darting into frame. Then came the sound, A sharp yelp, the unmistakable motion of Grant's legs striking out. Jake turned away, his throat tight. Ethan pressed pause. That's enough. We've got what we need. But Logan wasn't done. He scrolled forward, opened an audio log. Voices filled the cabin. Grant's and Marcus Sterling's, captured in the restaurant's private lounge. If that footage gets out, I'm finished, Grant hissed. Sterling's calm reply followed. Then, make it disappear, and make sure that kid takes the fall. Silence settled after the playback. Ethan closed the laptop slowly. We're taking this public. Public how? Jake asked. There's a gala tomorrow, Logan said. Grant's hosting a new charity launch downtown. Cameras, press, half the city council. You couldn't pick a better stage. The next evening, the ballroom of the Pacific Grand Hotel glittered like a temple to money. Photographers flashed, champagne flowed, and Richard Grant stood on stage in a navy suit, his smile practiced to perfection. Beverly, draped in emerald silk, stood beside him like an ornament. In the back row, Ethan, Jake, and Logan entered quietly. Ranger and Buddy stayed outside in the truck, waiting. Grant's voice filled the hall. Tonight we celebrate compassion, the heart of true philanthropy. The screen behind him flickered, then froze. A single frame appeared. Grant's foot raised mid-kick. The puppy's body curling in defense. The room went deathly still. The audio followed. Beverly's insult, Jake's apology, the dog's cry, and then the line that cut the air like a blade. You can buy anything in this room except a soul. Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras turned, recording. Grant's face went pale, his smile cracking under the lights. From the entrance, a voice rang out, firm, cold, and measured. That's the real Richard Grant. Ethan stepped forward, Logan beside him. Jake stood a pace behind, eyes unflinching for the first time since that night. Grant stammered, "This is slander. Security?" But another figure appeared, Sheriff Brody, a stout man in his 50s with sandy hair and the weary calm of someone who had seen too much ugliness to be surprised anymore. His badge glinted under the stage lights. "Not slander," he said, raising a warrant. "Evidence." He read the charges clearly. Animal cruelty, evidence tampering, false accusation. When the deputies moved in, Grant tried to protest, but his words drowned beneath the applause. For the first time, the wealthy man's voice was powerless. Outside, the night wind carried a salt tang from the sea. Ranger and Buddy waited by the truck, tails wagging as their people returned. Jake knelt to hug the two dogs, tears streaking his face, not from fear this time, but from release. Ethan watched the hotel behind them, the flashing lights fading into distance. Logan clapped him on the back. "You always did know how to make an entrance." Ethan half smiled. "And you always knew when to keep receipts." They stood there a moment, quiet under the stars, the world feeling lighter, not clean, but less heavy. For once the truth had barked louder than the lies. The morning light over the Pacific was soft and gold, the kind that makes even the old scars of the world look gentle. Months had passed since the night Richard Grant's empire cracked under the weight of truth. The story made headlines for a week and then vanished beneath newer scandals, as stories always do. But here, on the quiet edge of the coast, life didn't need headlines to matter. The cabin, once a refuge of silence and ghosts, now breathed differently. Its porch smelled of roasted coffee and salt air. Laughter sometimes floated out from the kitchen window. Jake Miller leaned against the porch railing, watching the waves curl and break in slow rhythm. He'd grown stronger since that night. The boyish lines in his face had sharpened into the steadiness of a man who'd learned what loss and loyalty cost. His sandy hair was longer now, sun-lightened to gold at the ends. His hands bore small scars from work, wood, salt, and time, but they were the hands of someone rebuilding something worth keeping. Inside, the coffee grinder hummed softly. The sign above the door read, "Coast Light Haven, where the light returns." Jake had painted it himself on a piece of driftwood he found washed up after a storm. The letters weren't perfectly straight, but maybe that was the point. Perfection never healed anyone. Kindness did. He turned as the door opened. A woman stepped inside, shaking the morning mist from her dark coat. She was in her late 30s, with olive skin and tired green eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. Her name was Maria Delgado, a former Army medic who had driven 3 hours from Los Angeles after hearing about the Veterans Coffee House by the sea. She was slender, with sharp cheekbones and hands that still trembled slightly when she wasn't paying attention, a souvenir from field trauma she'd never quite left behind. Jake greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome to Coast Light Haven. First cup's on the house." Maria smiled faintly. "You're Jake, the one who started this place." He nodded, wiping his hands on a cloth. "It wasn't just me. The man who built this house taught me how to make it mean something." As she sat, Buddy trotted up, no longer a puppy, but a young, confident German shepherd with alert amber eyes and a coat that shimmered bronze in the light. His ribs had healed, though a faint scar still traced along one side. He rested his head against Maria's knee, sensing the tremor in her hands. She froze, startled, then smiled as Buddy nudged closer. Jake poured her coffee, the rich scent of beans filling the air. "He's good at finding the people who need him most," he said quietly. Maria's voice was soft. "How old is he?" "Almost a year. He's been through more than most." Jake paused, glancing toward the old photograph hanging behind the counter. Ethan Cole in uniform, one hand on Ranger's collar, the other shading his eyes against the sun. The caption Jake had added beneath it read, "Some heroes walk on 2 legs, some on 4. Ranger still lived here, of course. The older shepherd moved slower these days, his muzzle frosted with gray, his steps deliberate but dignified. He spent most mornings lying near the porch, watching the ocean as if guarding the horizon itself. Sometimes veterans would come to sit beside him, silent men with faraway eyes, and Ranger would rest his head on their boots, grounding them back to now. Maria followed Jake's gaze to the photo. "He was your friend?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "More than that. He saved me, gave me this life. He's away now, back with his unit." Her brow furrowed. "You think he'll come back?" Jake's smile held both faith and acceptance. "If he can, he will." Days at Coast Light Haven fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for coffee and soft music, afternoons for quiet conversations, and the laughter of those who had forgotten they could still laugh. Some nights candles burned along the porch rail, and people told stories, not about battles or medals, but about dogs, songs, and the strange ways light finds you again when you think you've lost it forever. One visitor came often. Thomas Briggs, a retired Navy engineer in his 60s, with a limp and a booming laugh. His left hand was missing 2 fingers, but he played harmonica like the sea itself had taught him. Thomas was heavyset, bald on top, but with a white beard that framed a face weathered by salt and sun. He called everyone kid, no matter their age, and brought bread every Friday. He'd lost his son overseas, and though he rarely spoke of it, everyone knew that was why he came. Ranger had chosen him as a favorite, lying at his feet every evening while Thomas played low, haunting tunes. By early spring, Coast Light Haven had become something bigger than Jake imagined. The local paper wrote about it, a place for the lost to feel found. Veterans came, travelers came, some just stopped for a cup of coffee and stayed for hours. But for Jake, the mornings were still the quietest, the time when the world felt closest to the way Ethan left it. He'd sit with 2 mugs on the table, one untouched. Ranger would lie beside him, eyes half closed, as if guarding that empty cup for someone who might still return. One such morning began like any other, the sky pale with dawn, fog still clinging to the water. Jake was behind the counter, refilling the grinder, when Buddy's ears shot up. The dog trotted to the door, tail wagging in an odd, hesitant rhythm. A moment later, Ranger rose too, slow but alert, his old bones moving with a sudden energy Jake hadn't seen in months. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked softly. Then came the sound, boots on the wooden steps, steady and familiar. The door creaked open. Ethan Cole stood framed in the light. His uniform was crisp, but the man wearing it carried the wear of distance. New lines around his eyes, a streak of gray through his hair. Yet his presence filled the room the way a returning tide reclaims the shore. Ranger barked once, a sound halfway between joy and disbelief, before bounding forward with surprising speed. The old shepherd pressed against Ethan's legs, whining softly. Buddy joined, tail whipping, paws on Ethan's knees. Ethan laughed, the first real laugh Jake had ever heard from him, and crouched, ruffling their fur. "Miss me, huh?" Jake stood frozen for a moment before stepping forward. "You made it back." Ethan rose, the hint of a smile tugging his lips. "Told you I'd try." They clasped hands, a firm, wordless handshake that carried everything they didn't need to say. Maria, who had been sitting in the corner, watched silently. There was something sacred about the moment, the kind of quiet that only exists when broken things find their way home. Ethan looked around the cafe, at the photographs, the candles, the sign on the wall. "You did good here, kid," he said finally. Jake's voice wavered. "It's your place, too." Ethan shook his head. "Not anymore. You made it into something better. I just built the walls. You filled them with life." Outside, the morning light brightened into gold. The waves rolled in, rhythmic and endless. Ethan sat with them on the porch, Ranger's head resting on his boot, Buddy sprawled in Jake's lap. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Sometimes healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding a place where your ghost could sit beside you and not scare you anymore. The sign above them creaked softly in the wind. Coast Light Haven, where the light returns. And on that quiet stretch of coast, it truly had. At its heart, the house where souls were healed reminds us that no matter how deep the wounds of war, loss, betrayal, or loneliness, there is always a place where light can return. Healing doesn't come all at once. It comes through compassion, loyalty, and the quiet courage to keep showing up for one another. Ethan, Jake, Ranger, and Buddy prove that even broken souls can build something beautiful when they refuse to give up on kindness. In our everyday lives, we all meet people like them, the silent veterans, the tired workers, the ones hiding their pain behind a smile. Sometimes all they need is someone who listens, or a moment of warmth to remind them that they still belong. Let's be that light for others, the way they were for each other.